Good morning, Facebook. Good morning, YouTube. This is Reuben, and I'm back with another Reuben report. Today it is Saturday, and we have completed week 1 of our daily commute, or I would also like to call it the ultimate endurance test. We are currently at, well, we will see here in a moment. $3,014.7 miles. So, as promised, I'm going to be doing today my short-term 3,000 mile review of my RX3. So, I anticipate that this particular video is most likely going to get some of the most traffic and the most views. A lot of the folks who probably watch this video don't know me, know nothing about my story, and this might be the very first video that you get to encounter Reuben Reports. So, when it comes to you guys that aren't familiar with who I am and what it is that I'm about, before we get started with the review, I'd like to go into a little intro about myself, my background, why it is that I even bought an RX3 or even considered buying an RX3, and a little bit just about me as a rider. What is it that I'm looking for? Why do I use this bike? What it is that I use it for? And so I'm going to go into that section, a little intro section, for you guys that are probably in the Facebook group or who have been subscribed to my channel. You already know, you already been following along. This is some redundant information that I don't have to repeat for you guys. So, in the bottom of the description below, just go ahead and skip forward to the begin of the actual review. And so, while I go ahead and do that, give you guys a little background about myself, I'm gonna go ahead and clean my chain, and then once we're done with all of that, we'll get to the review portion. Alright, so here in this section, we're going to talk a little bit about my background, how long it is that I've actually been riding motorcycles, why did I even start wanting to ride motorcycles, what was my first bike, what led me to even consider buying a Chinese motorcycle of all bikes, and what led me to even buy a CSC RX3, and then lastly, what is Reuben Reports all about? Why did I start this channel? And why is it that I'm actually making all this different kind of content and choosing to report about this bike? So let's start from the beginning. Why is it that I started riding motorcycles, and how long have I started riding motorcycles? Well, I live in California, and for the past 2 years, I have seen gas prices steadily increase astronomically. Okay, and I think you guys probably have noticed with the majority of the videos that I do, whenever I'm working on my bike, it's outside, and I generally use my pickup truck as like a workbench. That pickup truck has been my go-to ride or die daily commuter before I actually have my motorcycle. And you can imagine with the type of gas mileage that the truck got, which is at best 13 miles to the gallon, I was very quickly looking for alternative methods of transportation to fulfill my commuting needs to be able to go back and forth from work. I first tried to look at maybe riding a bicycle, but for the distances that I was doing and would be doing, at the job that I had at the time had me going 10 miles back and forth, which was not going to be sustainable, especially with the amount of sleep that I was getting for that particular job that I had back then. I was working 12-hour shifts, but I was in reality away from home for 17 hours of the day, because that 10-hour commute that I had back then, that was really just to a shuttle stop. it was just a bus stop. The bus drove me the extra 60 miles to where my work was actually at. So, having to potentially add an extra 2 hours on my whole work day, so being away from home 19 hours a day instead of 17, that wasn't going to cut it. Electrical bikes and motorcycles were also out of the picture. First off, they're just way too costly for the amount of performance that they give. They also have their drawbacks because battery degradation, and the performance of these machines vary drastically depending on the weather outside. If it's too cold, if it's too hot. For $4,000-$3,000, I mean, that's as much money as you're gonna have to spend. You might as well just buy a motorcycle. Right? So that's what pretty much led me to research motorcycles, because after researching motorcycles, I was learning you can get way over 50 miles to the gallon with most bikes. And the bikes that I was looking at, obviously I wanted to make sure that it was going to fit somebody of my size. I am 6'5" and a little over 300 pounds. I'm a very big, tall guy. I did not want to be on, which was most people were suggesting, a Honda Rebel or a Ninja. Those are bikes that are way too small for someone of my size. So cruisers were completely out of the picture. I didn't want to be sitting so low. And then sport bikes were also completely out of the picture because I didn't want to be hunched over for any sustained amount of time. So that pretty much just left me with the dual sport or adventure bike category. And for my very first motorcycle, with all the research that I was doing, I was actually led to a lot of different YouTube videos talking about the Hawk 250. The Hawk 250 is a bike that is very popular. It was extremely inexpensive. You can buy it off of Amazon and a lot of other different websites for under $2,000. And the thought of getting a brand new motorcycle for under $2,000 that can get up to 70 mpg, that was very appealing. I went on Amazon that one day, tried to click the order button. Lo and behold, cannot be shipped to California. Same story goes for all the different bikes that are named under various different names. The Hawk 250 and all of its cousins, pretty much what you're getting is a clone motor, and then every other company that takes that motor is basically slapping their brand on it and building a bike frame around it. So the TBR7, the Life and Expect, the Magician, blah blah blah, fill in the blank. There's just so many of them out there of dual sport Chinese clones. Pretty much all the same bike, all around the same price, but it's just none of them were California legal, except for the CSC TT250. Now, at the time, buying a brand new CSC TT250 delivered straight to my door was going to be around $3,700, maybe $3,500. I just could not justify the price tag, especially knowing that the performance and the overall quality potentially was going to be the exact same of a Hawk 250. Why the extra $2,000? Just didn't make any sense to me. So I didn't want to pull the trigger on a brand new TT250. However, I was lucky enough to find a used TT250 within my surrounding area. Popped up on Craigslist, shot the guy a message, went on out there, snagged it from him for about $2,500. So that bike was my first bike. I was able to learn how to ride on it. That was pretty much its main purpose. because after outfitting it with all the different modifications that most folks do when it comes to those Chinese dual sport bikes, like gearing and that nature, the only thing I didn't touch was the exhaust and the jets. For some reason at the time I just couldn't buy any jet kits from CSC. They were just always sold out. And then on top of that, the exhaust stuff, again, the same old cannot be shipped to California crap, or I just really didn't want to deal with it. So pretty much I just used that bike to ride around town, and again, it served its purpose of helping me learn how to ride. Kept that bike for about 3 months, and just so you guys can get a little time frame here, I bought that bike at the end of September. So I kept it really for about 2.5 months, actually. That was September of 2021. So up to this point here in June, beginning of June, I've been riding for about 8 months now. Yeah, about 8 months now. And the bike, after I sold the TT250, or actually even before I sold it, I was doing a lot of research on the CSC RX3. It's a really natural progression. You're trying to, sticking within the CSC family. Most folks, once they're done with, they usually buy the SG250 first or the TT250 first, and then they naturally progress to potentially one of the bigger line models like the RX line, or even the new Halon or SG400. So I started digging and doing a lot of research when it comes to the RX3. The problem when it came to potentially getting into the RX3 is that there really wasn't that much information out there. A lot of the information that you would find was going to be buried in hundreds of pages on forums, but then otherwise you're pretty much subjected to the very few limited YouTube videos that are out there. Most of them are in different languages, or it's just folks who are just riding around having fun, except for one video. We all know what that video is. Where that one video, you probably have seen it. If you have searched CSC RX3 review, you've probably seen Everride's video, where he basically is using this adventure bike as a dual sport bike and giving his review on it. Nonetheless, I watched that video, and pretty much the general consensus from all the people who were within that video who gave their thoughts on the bike, they said this bike is probably best suited for someone who wants to hop on it, go to work, and come back. And I was like, that's fine with me. That's exactly what it is that I want to buy the bike for. So I started to try to find a lot of information on this bike when it comes to someone who wanted to buy this bike from a perspective of wanting to use it as a commuter bike, essentially. And for someone who wanted to use this bike as a commuter bike, I couldn't find much information out there at all. And to me, my definition of a commuter bike, it takes a whole different level of durability, in my opinion, to have a commuter bike versus, a bike that you take out on weekends or every once in a while to have some fun here and, now and then. A commuter bike needs to stand up to daily abuse. Well, I really won't call it abuse, but daily use, right? If a commuter bike needs to be a bike that can essentially give consistent performance and have consistent reliability and durability to be able to sustain high mileage. The V-Strom, in my opinion, is probably the king of adventure style commuter bikes. There are dozens of V-Stroms out there in existence, probably hundreds of V-Stroms out there in existence that are well over 200,000 miles. So when it comes to a commuter bike, well, that's what I was looking for. I was looking for someone who had any type of information, or someone who was going to be reporting on this bike and how it performs as a commuter. Couldn't find any. Well, that's pretty much been the birth of Reuben Reports. I wanted to be that voice out there that started to give folks realistic inside view of what it's like to own one of these bikes from the perspective of someone who wants to use it as a commuter bike. How reliable is it? You know, how easy is it to do maintenance on? How expensive is it to maintain? What are certain issues that you need to look out for? How reliable is it? Can it, stand up to the daily grind? Can you really depend on it? These are all the questions that I wanted to answer, and I decided to go ahead and document my experience in full detail, so that way, again, other folks like out there that were just like me could have a good insider view of what it would really be like to own this bike and use it as a commuter bike. So I hope this explanation has given you a little bit more in-depth understanding of who I am, why it is that I started to buy motorcycles or ride motorcycles, what is it I'm trying to use this bike for, and also what this channel is all about. And I am not paid by CSC. I'm a consumer just like you guys. So I've pretty much dedicated this channel and a lot of my reports that I've been doing to be very transparent and very realistic about any issues and all the different strengths and weaknesses of the bike, so that way you as a consumer, just like myself, can have realistic expectations, right? There's a lot of folks out there who love the Hawk 250. They know exactly what they're getting into, and when it comes to the CSC bikes, not so much. There's just not that much information out there. So I wanted to make sure that there's someone like myself who gives you that realistic insight, so that way you can know exactly what it is that you're getting into. This bike is not perfect. It has its ups and downs, which we're going to go into a lot more detail about. But that's pretty much the reason why this whole channel exists. All right. All right, so I went ahead and cleaned the chain. I got the solution, or the chain wax that I usually use, letting it soak in, while we're going to go ahead and talk about the review portion. So before we start the actual review, I do want to go over all the upgrades that I've done so far to the bike up until this point. So before we start off with all that, I do want to share this little picture of how my bike looked when I first bought it. I first bought it in January, so I've had this bike for almost 6 months now. So January 15th is when I bought it, and so you guys will get to see how the bike looked when it was first delivered versus, well, how it looks now. Alright, so these first couple pictures here are going to be the bike in its configuration that I received it on delivery day. In its complete standard stock configuration. I did purchase the bike along with a center stand and tall seat. They were not installed by CSC. I actually installed them the following day, and in this picture here you can see the center stand and the taller seat. And that day I also went ahead and started the break-in process, so you get to see a little picture here of the back roads that I commonly ride on in the background. So as you guys can see, I've done quite a bit to this bike in the past 6 months that I've owned it, and we'll just start with some of the, to me, probably the most important item that you should get if you're going to be buying an RX3, and we'll just go through all these different upgrades, one upgrade at a time. So starting with number one, the center stand. The center stand is about, I believe, 150 bucks, if I'm not mistaken. No, 130 bucks. Okay. This upgrade pretty much is the main thing that differentiates the RX3 from the RX4. If you're someone who would like to have convenience when it comes to your bike, this makes things extremely convenient. As you can see, I just cleaned my chain with the bike on the center stand, and as long as you have the bike on the center stand, you're able to move both wheels and spin both wheels freely. That makes all kinds of maintenance on this bike so much easier. It's just easier to work on a bike when it's up straight and not lean to one side. So that upgrade is for someone like myself who is using this bike as a commuter. You're going to be putting a lot of miles on this bike. You're going to be doing a lot of maintenance on this bike. I almost clean my chain almost every week because of how many miles I accumulate. So this is definitely a much welcomed upgrade for anyone who is looking to use their motorcycle frequently. Okay. Now, the next most important upgrade to me is the tall seat. Okay, the stock seat on this bike, it's a lot shorter. It's really more suited for folks who are shorter, maybe around 6 feet and below. The tall seat raises the seat height from 31.4 inches, if I'm not mistaken, up to a little over 34 inches. So me, where I have a 36-inch inseam, this makes things a lot more comfortable. Okay, my knees don't have to be up in the fairing, while I'm riding. They're a little bit more relaxed. My leg can be a little bit more straight, and it's just a lot more comfortable for someone who is of my size, 6'5". Right. The next upgrade that I did was an LED headlight. Okay, the LED, the stock headlight bulb that comes in here is a halogen bulb. For nighttime riding, it was absolutely atrocious. It did an okay job with casting light, but it didn't do quite a good enough job. So I went ahead and put an LED in there. It's gonna last a lot longer, and it's just so much stronger when it comes to the stock headlight bulb. One thing I will recommend, though, if you're looking to get a LED headlight for this bike, I'm not sure if you guys can see here, but the actual whole headlight housing, it's enclosed. So basically what that means is that there's not that much airflow, right? So if you're getting one of those types of LED headlight bulbs that has a fan on the back, you're going to have to take this out and you're going to have to modify it. You're going to have to put holes in the back of the headlight housing in order to allow the LED bulb with a fan to breathe. Another thing is that the headlight housing itself, it's not very big. So when it comes to those types of LEDs that have fans on them, a lot of them are probably just not going to fit. So the LED that I have is what they call a true 1-to-1 fit. It basically mimics the same size of the original H4 headlight bulb. It's fanless, and it uses it's basically the exact same size. So it's the same size as the bulb that went in there, so I don't have to do any modifications to the headlight housing. It stays the way that it is. It doesn't need any airflow. It does its job. So it's a very easy swap if you get a LED headlight that is a true 1-to-1 fit. Okay, no modifications needed. All right, now the issue with both the stock headlight and even the LED headlight, when light is projected, it kind of leaves this gap 10 feet from in front of the bike. Okay, and it's very hard to see while you're actually riding what's directly in front of you. So that's what leads me to my next upgrade, which is the auxiliary lights. Okay, I believe if you're riding in areas where it's like extremely dark outside, like pitch black, if you're riding in cities, the LED headlight should be just enough. You're probably going to be riding where there's street lights and there's ambient lighting around you. But if you're riding on potentially back roads where it's pitch black, or in the woods, or off-road, stuff like that, auxiliary lights are going to be something that you will absolutely need. And these have proven to be quite helpful and quite useful. If you want more information about these headlights and also the LED headlight and how they perform together, I suggest that you check out my CSC RX3 surprise upgrade video, where I also go in a little bit more detail and actually show you how to install these lights as well. The next couple of upgrades will be the everything that I did to make my bike a lot more comfortable for the winter months. Where I live, it doesn't get too cold, but like I don't have snow or anything being here in California, but the wind chill really does get to you. So I have added this extended windshield, or this windscreen. It's about 6 inches tall, and with this it deflects most of the wind away from me, and it's adjustable. So if I wanted to lower it down for the summer months like it is now, I can lower it down so I can get wind off of me. But I usually just keep it up because it's not just wind that's being deflected, because as you can see with all the bug splatters, it splatters a lot of bugs away from me as well. Next will be these humongous handguards. Okay, now they're more like wind guards, not handguards, because traditional or proper handguards will have some type of metal bar support on the inside, which this one doesn't. It's just plastic. It just deflects the wind and also a lot of bugs off of my hand as well. As you can see, it keeps rain off of my hands as well. It doesn't rain too much where I'm at, where I live, but it covers my hand pretty well. All right, and then lastly would be the heated grips. I went with the Bike Master brand. They do get pretty hot. They get up to, I believe, 135, 140 degrees Fahrenheit. So they get pretty toasty, and they do their job very well. Very, very worth it for the price. They fit on very easily, and with those three things, the bike was perfectly set up for winter, and I was able to survive. Wearing quite a few layers and having the heated grips, keeping most of the wind off of me. It was great. All right, the next set of upgrades that we're going to go over is pretty much all the upgrades that I've done to the bike to improve MPG performance. I do have a playlist on my channel called the MPG Experiment Playlist, and so all these different upgrades I'm going to talk about right now are all the things that I've done to increase MPG performance. Starting with the spark plug. So the spark plug on this side, I replaced it. I'm not going to take it out, but the spark plug that I have in there, if you're looking for where your spark plug is located, it's right on in here. Okay. All right. And the stock spark plug, it's not absolutely terrible, but when I upgraded to a proper NGK spark plug, I managed to increase my MPG performance from 55 MPG up to 57.5 MPG for my commute route that I was doing. So it made quite a strong difference, and the impact they made was quite significant. That was the first upgrade that I did. Okay, and again, being a much heavier guy riding this bike, I decided to lower the gearing, because with the stock gearing, the bike was having trouble launching from a dead stop. And I think the stock gearing on this bike is really tall for anybody, really. The stock gearing on this bike is a 14-tooth front and a 44-tooth rear. And with that type of gearing ratio, this bike claims that it can go 84 miles an hour top speed. Now, you can scour through the forums, you can look at all the different top speed videos that are available on YouTube when it comes to this bike, and I can already tell you and guarantee you right now, the bike in its stock configuration, and when I mean stock configuration, I mean as you see it when you buy it. That means with the crash bars, that means with the boxes, that means with everything that is still on it. No weight reduction, nothing. Just the bike as it is with stock gearing. I have not seen anyone, period, anyone on flat ground, wide open throttle, be able to go faster than 80 miles an hour with stock gearing. Okay, just doesn't happen. The bike is geared way too high for someone to be able to reach the actual claimed top speed that this bike actually claims that it can reach. So, for the majority of people out there, you will benefit from lowering the gearing. Okay, if you're looking to use this bike off-road, lower the gearing. If you're looking to use this bike as a commuter bike, I guarantee you, if you lower the gearing, you're going to get better results. Even if it's just one tooth in the back, it's going to give the bike a much more torque and much more maneuverability with lower speeds. And also, once you're actually riding up hills or just trying to maintain certain speeds on the highway, you'll have that little bit more oomph, a little bit more torque to be able to maintain those speeds. Because with the bike geared as high as it was stock, I was really at the mercy of hills, wind, and everything else. But again, I am a pretty big, tall guy, so the bike was struggling already with someone of my size. But not even just for me. I mean, almost anyone who rides this bike with stock gearing will tell you that it's not the best. Okay, so again, lowering the gearing will give this bike much better road manners, much better performance on and off road. I guarantee it. But the first sprocket that I experimented with was a 45 tooth rear sprocket. I no longer have the 45 tooth rear sprocket on there now, but when I did have the 45 tooth rear sprocket for my MPG experiments, I actually went from 57.5, which was from the spark plug. I went up from 57.5 up to 58.6 MPG, somewhere around there, right? Then I added a 13 tooth front sprocket, and the 13 tooth front sprocket in conjunction with the 45 tooth rear sprocket, I went up again from 58.6 to a little over 59 MPG. for my daily commute route. And so that proved through those experiments that lowering the gearing for someone of my size, and lowering the gearing just in general, gave this bike a lot more power. It widened the power band. I was able to use a lot lower RPMs and launch from a dead stop a lot easier. The bike pulled me a lot easier. It had a lot more consistent power throughout all of the gears, and the engine was working easier, which allowed me to use a lot less of my throttle hand, which is really the beauty of lowering the gearing on the bike. Because with stock gearing, which is the reason why I was actually able to get better MPG with lower gearing versus the stock higher gearing. With stock gearing, to go the speeds that I wanted to go on the back roads, which was about 60 miles an hour GPS, I had to have my throttle pinned back about that much. Okay, with the gearing that I have now, going an indicated 60 at 7,000 RPMs, I pull my hand back that much. That's the difference. I use about 30% throttle now versus 60% throttle from stock gearing. And a lot of folks would tell you that if you raise the gearing or go higher in gearing, you should get better gas mileage on the highway. In part, that's true, you know. But the thing about this particular bike is that regardless of what the gearing is, to get any kind of power out of it, the revs are going to have to be high anyway. And in my experimentations that I've done, to get the best performance, MPG performance, you have to focus more on your throttle hand than you do on the RPMs. Although riding at lower RPMs, which I'll talk about a little bit later when it comes to the second time that I had to do the engine break-in on this bike, I did get a lot better MPG performance. But in comparison to the first time that I did the engine break-in process on this bike with stock gearing, first time I did the engine break-in with stock gearing, I got 55 mpg at best, and the second time that I did the engine break-in process with this bike with the lower gearing, I got 68 mpg. So you see the big difference there. When the RPMs were the same, when I was riding at 5,000 or below, RPMs being the exact same, we have a difference of 13 mpg, which is crazy. All right, and now that we've gotten through all of the upgrades that I've done for the MPG experiment videos, now we're going to the more recent upgrades. So that will be starting with the quick release drain plug. Okay. Again, that's an upgrade that's more, I would say, optional. It's not necessary. For folks who don't use this bike very much, I would probably even say you should skip it. Main reason being, the price of the upgrade in itself is like almost 70 bucks. It's, yeah, again, it's very expensive for just some clear tubing and to be able to drain your oil quickly and more, efficiently. But for someone like myself, again, someone who's looking to put a lot of miles on this bike, who's looking to do frequent oil changes, and oil changes a lot more lot more often than the typical rider, it was something that I thought would be a much welcomed efficiency upgrade. Yeah, a lot of folks, when it comes to their motorcycles, they probably put maybe 3,000 miles a year. We're going to talk about a little bit more about the whole reliability side of this bike and what it is that I've gone through with my bike. But if I didn't have to experience the issues that I have experienced when it comes to my bike, I would have had close to over 5,000 miles right now and not 3,000 miles right now. So that just gives you a good comparison and contrast to how it is that I ride my bike versus the typical rider. Yeah, the typical rider, again, like I just said, 3,000 miles a year, and I would have put 5,000 miles on my bike in a little under 6 months. So by the end of a year, I would have had over 10,000 miles on this bike. But we'll see if we'll get. I mean, we're probably not going to get there, but we'll probably get close. And all right, the next upgrade, okay, convenience upgrade, was the Bluetooth air pressure sensors. Those Bluetooth air pressure sensors connect to my phone and give me a live feed of my tire pressure and also the tire temperature. Okay, that's something that the RX4 does on the dash, which was just a little something that just made maintaining your tire pressure a lot more easier. Yeah, you don't have to whip out a tire pressure gauge and you know a little bit more about if your tire is leaking air or if the tires are not warm enough to do certain maneuvers. Yeah. The most recent upgrades that I have on my bike would then be this little seat cushion that helps me in hot weather. Also, if it rains out, it doesn't allow the seat to I don't have to sit on a wet seat. But this here gives a lot more airflow to my nether regions in this really hot Central Valley climate where it gets over 100 degrees sometimes. So, very welcome upgrade. And then the new top box. This top box has added a lot more utility to my bike. It is a universal style top box, so the mounting plate underneath can fit to almost any motorcycle that has a back rack. The stock luggage that came with this bike, this box here, the stock top box, which I still have in my garage over there. I don't know if you guys can see it. Okay, the stock top box is pretty much the same size as this box here, and then the right side box is actually deceivingly small because you have this cutout for the exhaust here, so you kind of lose some space. But altogether, all the stock boxes come out to about 50 liters of space. Okay, combined. So about 20 for the side and the top, because they're virtually the same size, and then you have 10 for the right side. So again, about 50 altogether. Now, this one box, this is 45 liters. So virtually, almost, this one box kind of replaces almost all three boxes. but I didn't do that. I didn't remove the other boxes. I just added this on top. So now instead of having 50 liters of space, I now have 75 liters of space. So for grocery shopping and doing other miscellaneous things, it's made it a lot easier to carry a lot more things. And then on top of that, I'm able to actually put my helmet in here, because obviously in the stock boxes they're just not big enough. So that was a very welcome upgrade. I'm able to put my helmet in there and lock it up and not have to carry it with me, or put it somewhere else on my bike where it could potentially be stolen. Alright guys, now for the absolute last upgrade that I've done on the bike thus far is the chain. And while I talk about that, I'm also going to clean this right after. It's time for the stuff to come off. The chain, the stock chain that comes on this bike is notorious for going out prematurely. And it's also kind of, I don't want to say, unpredictable. Some folks claim that they got up to 7,000 miles on it. Some folks claim they get about 3,000 miles on it. The majority of folks claim that at around 1,500 to 2,000 miles, the stock chain starts to stretch uncontrollably. And that was the case for me as well. So the stock chain that I had at around 1,800, 1,700 miles, it just started to stretch uncontrollably. I wanted to get up to 3,000 miles out of it before I replaced it, but obviously I didn't make it that far. So I replaced it with a nice quality Japanese chain. This chain should last me 20,000 miles. It's pretty much what most people say that they last. So I don't really foresee any issues to be had with this chain. It has a master link as well, so it's easy to take off if need be and replace if need be. But I don't foresee any type of issues being had with this bike, with this chain. I've had it for a little over 1,000 miles now. Haven't had to adjust it once. So nothing really to be said about it. A better chain. Obviously this is going to be one of the most important components when it comes to your drivetrain. So if you are going to have this bike and buy this bike, I don't necessarily say throw the stock chain away immediately. You can still use it. Go ahead and get your money's worth out of it. 1,500 miles or so, and as soon as it starts stretching like crazy on you, go ahead and just replace it with a much better quality Japanese chain. Alright, so now that the chain is all cleaned up and I got it stored away, we're pretty much going to talk about the next section of this video on the inside. We're going to talk about 5 different categories. So to start off, we're going to talk about a little bit of features, design, and a little bit of history when it comes to this bike. Next, we're going to talk about performance. Then we're going to talk about convenience. And then we're going to talk about the overall value of this bike, along with some reliability that I've also gotten out of this bike thus far. Keep in mind, this is just my 3,000 mile review. There's going to be many other reviews after this, but I'm pretty much going to make this particular review quite in-depth, so that way my reviews after this, well, we can just pretty much find out how the bike is done, or how the bike will still be doing as time goes on. Alright, in this section of the video, we're going to talk a little bit about the history, the features, and the overall design of this motorcycle. For the CSC RX3, it has been available and for sale for about 7 years now. It was first released in 2015, and ever since then there has been a couple changes here and there, not too much, but I would say the biggest change that happened was between the 2015 version of the bike and the 2016 version of the bike. There is a Chinarider Forums post that shows you all the different changes that have been made, because the 2015 bike was really kind of the trial run, as you will. A lot of the folks who bought that bike bought it at a very special price, under $3,000, and all the people who bought that particular bike, they were pretty much the pioneers of CSC adventure bikes, right? All of their feedback basically led to all the changes and iterations that the bike has made since then. And between 2016 until now, the bike hasn't really changed much at all. And I think while I was actually doing research on this motorcycle, the biggest review that is on YouTube that you can find, again, you've probably seen it already. You've seen it from Everride. One of his statements that he had in that video was give the CSC a few years to go through a few iterations to see how things change. Mainly, that video that Everride made was made about 5-6 years ago. So it was like 2016 when he made that video. CSC at the time was very new to the scene, also very new to the ADV scene. Again, I'm not reviewing this bike from the perspective of trying to be an adventure rider. I just want to use it as a commuter bike. But what he said was still very important and stands true. Let the bike go through a couple of iterations so we can actually see what the durability, what the reliability, and see if things evolve as time goes on. And that has not been the case. The bike still has a lot of the same issues that it's always had. And when it comes to at least the powertrain, that is, the engine, the transmission, the chain, a lot of different components, it's pretty much the same. So that's one thing that I wanted to note, is that after 7 years, I would have hoped that the bike would have evolved in some way, but it just hasn't. It's just stayed the same. And there's just, which we're going to go over in the reliability portion, there's just certain items and certain things that I really would like to change. But for now, I just wanted to let that be known. Another part about the history, according to the history of the bike, the engine that is within this bike comes from what they call a RC3 motorcycle. On the CSC website, and you look at the CSC RX3, in the description of that bike, you will see there that the same 250 engine that is used in the RX3 actually comes from a MotoGP bike. Okay, and this engine was pretty much from the late 90s, early 2000s. So to today's standards, quite old. And when you have that realization that this engine comes from pretty much a racing bike, it's understandable why it revs so high and all the power is made when it revs high. Most other 250cc motorcycles out in the scene, especially the 250cc motorcycles that are of the modern age, like a 2022 model, they rev a lot higher and they make a lot more horsepower and a lot more torque. But I don't really think that's the aim for this particular bike. This particular bike is not designed to be a powerhouse. It's designed to be an efficient and effective all-rounder. And I think the power output as far as the 250cc is concerned, is adequate enough for the purpose of which this bike was made for. All right. Now we're going to start talking a little bit more about the design when it comes to the engine. And as far as the design is concerned, I think they were very smart with the way that they chose to design this motorcycle. Again, when we look at the performance, it's not really all there in comparison to today's standards. But the one thing that I truly appreciate when it comes to the engine design is that it is stupid simple, single cylinder. And especially when it comes to doing maintenance on this particular engine, it is super easy to do in comparison to the modern engines and modern valve trains. Like doing a valve adjustment on this bike, you guys have seen all the different videos that I've made on it, and obviously I am not a expert mechanic, okay? And I think that's the beauty of this motorcycle, is that it was designed in such a way to be maintained with simple hand tools, which I give a huge thumbs up and shout out to Zongshan and for designing the motorcycle in such a way to be so easily maintained. Another huge benefit when it comes to the design of the motorcycle, okay, is that it pretty much can be modified in any particular way to fit your needs, you know. So this is also kind of going into more to the features category of this bike. As far as the standard features are concerned that it comes with, it's pretty much already set up for you to be able to ride it straight out of the factory and go on an adventure. You got the crash guards, you got the top box, you got the panniers, you get the USB outlet and the 12 volt outlet. Everything else after that is basically for you to just fit and shape, mold the bike to fit your particular needs, which isn't much. Most bikes that you buy within the adventure category, you just get the bike itself. And most other bikes, if you do buy a bike that comes with a bunch of different luggage and all this kind of stuff, it's overly expensive. So let's say, for example, you buy one of the brand new KLRs or new Tenere 700s. Well, you're going to spend an extra, at least, especially for the KLR, you're going to be spending at least an extra $500 for, if you didn't buy the adventure model, you're going to be spending another $500 on some crash guards and some luggage system. Then you're going to be spending an extra, I don't know, depending on what your style is. Maybe you go with a milk crate, maybe you go with some soft panniers. Whatever it is that you do, that bill is going to get racked up to at least $1,000 on a luggage system, along with crash guards and potentially if you didn't buy the adventure model, then you're going to have some type of wiring system to hook up a 12 volt power for air compressor or other accessories to charge a phone and things of that nature. This bike comes standard with all those things, so it is awesome. Another thing that I love about this bike is that it is designed in such a way to suit all different kinds of riders. The stock seat is low enough for someone who is even of my wife's height of 5'6", maybe even 5'5", can fit it comfortably. There is a lowering link that is available and sold by CSC to even accommodate even shorter riders. Lower it by 1 inch, so even shorter people can even get on this bike. And then someone who is as tall as me, 6'5", I can get the tall seat and still feel very comfortable on this bike. So this bike suits a wide range of people for a wide variety of purposes. So another huge plus, right? It has a 300 watt stator, so that way you can hook up lots of different accessories and not overcharge the system. It has plenty of wattage and power supply to do that. And I think lastly about the features is that a lot of the things that are on this bike, they're very cheap to replace. You know, let's say you did drop this bike in comparison to, you know, one of those a lot more expensive adventure bikes. It's going to cost you hundreds of dollars to replace a fender or, you know, a mirror or something. Or on this bike, it doesn't cost very much. So those are all a little insight and view about the features and design of the motorcycle that I find very intriguing and very good about the bike. Okay, so for this section of the video, we're going to go dive deeper into the performance of the motorcycle, and in particular the performance of the motorcycle in its current configuration that I have it. I'm gonna go a little bit more in detail of why it is that I've configured my bike in the way that I have. I pretty much touched on it a little bit earlier on in this video, but with my findings and the reason why it is that I configured my bike the way that I've configured it, my goal as using this bike for a commuter bike is to maximize fuel efficiency. And when it comes to fuel efficiency, this bike is amazing. In comparison to a lot of other 250cc's, I mean, it's decent, but again, this is coming from a guy who is 6'5", a little over 300 pounds, and is looking for a motorcycle that I can sit up straight on and that is big enough for me. And when it comes to a lot of the different bikes that were in certain classes that I could actually use for the purpose of what I'm using it for, there wasn't much. I mean, my other options were pretty much a KLR, potentially a V-Strom, and maybe even potentially a old BMW GS of some sort, which this particular bike that I'm on, that I bought, does way better as far as gas mileage is concerned than any of those other bikes. So in that light, when it comes to the performance where it matters, which is MPG performance, this bike is amazing. Now, as far as top speed, again, I've had to change the gearing on my bike, but as far as top speed is concerned, I mean, you got to understand, it's a 250cc motorcycle. Now, even though the engine came from a MotoGP bike, it definitely does not go MotoGP bike speeds. All right. The sport bikes of today's society can go anywhere between high 80s, low 90s, potentially, as far as top speed is concerned. This one claims that it can go 84, but again, earlier in this video, I already stated it's like never happened. It's not happening, all right, with the stock gearing. So I lowered the gearing on my bike. The highest speed that I was able to achieve with lowered gearing was about 76. Okay. Definitely not winning any races there. Pretty much barely keeping up with traffic if I was to ride on the highway. This clip that you're seeing now in the background, this is a very old clip. This is when the bike still had standard gearing, and so you can see in real time how much the bike was struggling, either going uphill or trying to keep up with traffic. The speedometer is about 10% off. Okay, so even though you might see an indicated 80, I'm really going 72. Even though you might see an indicated 75, I'm really going 69. All right, so the bike with stock gearing does not give you the consistent performance that you would need to be able to keep up on the highway. Okay, it just does not. If you lower the gearing, you will be able to have a more consistent speed output. However, you're just not going to go that fast. All right. In all honesty, I believe this bike performs best when kept anywhere maximum at around 65 miles an hour. Okay. You're going to get your best results there. You're going to get decent MPG performance. You're not going to wind the engine out too much, and you're just going to have the most consistent performance out of the bike, right? Because especially for a commuter bike, you know, and if you had it in standard gearing, going wide open throttle for no reason when the bike just doesn't have the power to go any faster, regardless of what it is that you do, it's just best to just ride it in situations that you know, that favor you and that favor the bike. Understand its limitations, understand its restrictions, modify the bike in a way that's going to suit your needs. But yeah, performance wise, that's my suggestion. Ride it at a maximum of 65 miles an hour and you'll be good. Anything above that, you can try. You could try it. It may not sustain that particular speed for a very long time. Even with lower gearing, I just wouldn't want the bike to be close to red line or in red line for very long, because that's exactly where you're going to be when you lower the gearing like that. But yeah, performance wise, it's not winning any races. Get what you can out of it. MPG performance is where this bike really shines. All right, before we move on into the next section, I just wanted to reiterate a little bit about the performance. The speeds that I was quoting, like 65 miles an hour tops, I'm not saying 65 miles an hour indicated, okay? I'm talking GPS speeds. We're talking how fast the bike is actually going. So when you're going in 65 miles an hour tops, you're actually going to be doing an indicated 71, okay? Again, the speedometer is off by 10%. So all the speeds that I was quoting you, as far as wanting to keep the bike at or how fast it should actually go, we're talking GPS speeds. Okay. And to touch a little bit more on that as well, talking about the different gearing setups that I've had, every time that I've done within my MPG experiment series, I talked about and shown in those particular videos the MPG performance that the gearing change has made on the bike, along with the top speed performance of that gearing change as well. So the 1345 gearing change allowed me to go 76 miles an hour GPS, actual 76. That was 1345. The 1445 gearing change, that allowed me to go a maximum speed of 80 miles an hour. Okay. Now with stock gearing, which is 1444, 14 front, 44 rear, I was able to go maximum speed of 79. So I was actually able to go faster with the one tooth higher in the back, so lowering the gearing just a tiny bit. I was actually go faster with lower gearing than I was with stock gearing, because that little tiny bit of extra torque gave the bike a little bit better chance of pulling me and pulling the weight and pushing up against wind. So depending on who you are, again, when we're talking about top speeds, we're talking about this is as fast as the bike will ever possibly go. So obviously you're going to be in red line, and you do not want to be in red line riding this bike for over an hour long. It's just stupid. The videos that I did as far as top speed was concerned was exactly for that experimentation. I definitely do not ride the bike every single day in redline. Okay. If you want to know how I ride my bike, I've had many videos on that. Basically every single MPG performance video I have done is based on my commute route. My commute route is where, and I have other videos that are that show my commute route. My commute route with the bike in the gearing that I have now rides 60 miles a day, so 30 miles each way, at about 50 to 60 miles an hour. So again, 50 to 60 miles an hour GPS, not indicated. So indicated speeds, I usually sit around 61 miles an hour indicated, so at 55 miles an hour GPS. I basically stay there right in the middle. That's where I usually ride at. That is exactly at 7,000 RPMs. So when my bike rides exactly at 7,000 RPMs, it shows 61 miles an hour indicated. Okay. And studying the torque curve of the bike at 7,000 RPMs, that's exactly when the bike makes peak torque. So at peak torque, it's basically having the easiest time pulling itself and pulling me. And I don't have to roll the throttle back very much, as I said earlier in this video, which is why it is that I've gotten so much better gas mileage with lowered gearing versus the higher gearing, having to roll my throttle back a lot further. And earlier in this video, I talked a little bit about the gas mileage that I had received. Once again, I'm reiterating again that if you watch the MPG experimentation playlist, you would know how much the MPG has been affected with all the different upgrades that I had added throughout that MPG experiment series. But when it comes to the major MPG changes between lowered gearing and higher gearing that I have found is that although RPMs are higher with lowered gearing, at least for me, my throttle hand, the position of the throttle when I'm actually riding the bike, is a lot less when I have lower gearing versus with stock gearing. It's a lot more pronounced, where I'm a lot closer to full throttle to go the same speeds. But the absolute best MPG that I've ever received when it came to the stock gearing, okay? And I'm going to be fair and compare the stock gearing with the better spark plug versus the lower gearing with the better spark plug, because that's, at least everything's on an even playing field at that point. So when I did the first upgrade, which was the spark plug, the bike still had its standard gearing, and the best MPG that I've ever gotten with standard gearing was 57.5. Okay, 57.5 doing my commute route. So that's me riding at maximum 60 miles an hour GPS, or 65 miles an hour GPS rather, and going on the back roads with stock gearing. Okay, I got 57.5 MPG. Now when I lowered that gearing to 1445, so one tooth in the back, I raised that MPG from 57.5 to 58.6. Then next I changed the front sprocket to a 13 tooth front sprocket, and that gave me 1345 gearing, and I raised my MPG again to 59.4, I believe, or something around a little over 59 MPG. So lowering the gearing proved to me, when it comes to the performance of this motorcycle, where RPMs are almost pretty much the same, you get better gas mileage with lower gearing than you do with higher gearing. The bike just pulls you a lot easier with the lower gearing, you don't have to use as much throttle to get that same, to get the performance out of it in comparison to stock gearing. So the stock gearing is just ridiculously high. Okay. What was even more astonishing as far as MPG performance is concerned, when I compare the MPG performance that I got when breaking the bike in. We're going to go a little bit more into detail later on with the reliability section about why it is that I've had to do the engine break-in twice. But the first engine break-in was the bike was an absolute standard configuration. I had stock gearing, everything, stock spark plug, all that. I had gotten 55 MPG, was the best MPG that I've ever gotten with the bike in absolute standard configuration while going maximum 5,000 RPMs. Okay. When I did the engine break-in again, this was when my bike is in the configuration that it is now with 13 tooth front sprocket and 44 tooth rear. The best MPG that I got during the engine break-in, again, where RPMs are the absolute same, I got up to 68. That's a 13 MPG difference. 13 MPG difference. So obviously, if you're someone who is going to be riding this bike a lot slower, you're going to be riding this bike a lot calmer, lowering the gearing is definitely going to help you, because not only, again, does the bike pull you a lot easier, it pulls itself a lot easier. You use a lot less throttle to get going, and the bike just is a lot more efficient that way. It doesn't have to use as much energy. Make sense? All right, in this section, we're going to talk about the convenience of the RX3. And there's a lot of convenience to be spoken about when it comes to this bike. Obviously, this kind of ties into the features that you can buy for this motorcycle as well. A lot of the upgrades that I spoke about earlier in this video, the taller top box, the center stand, which is amazing, the quick release drain plug. These things not only give the bike a lot more utility, but it also allows you as the consumer, who quite fortunately, I mean, when you're buying this bike, you gotta understand, you're going to be the one who's going to be doing most of the maintenance. Okay. And I think that's one of the downsides when it comes to convenience, that is that you will be doing the maintenance yourself. Taking this bike to a bike shop, good luck. Most shops will just turn away and not want to have to deal with what they call Chinese junk, sadly. But if you do find a shop that is willing to work on the bike, it's very easy to work on. Your mechanic will thank you. But it's very encouraging and very much encouraged for you as the owner to work on the bike yourself. It's not very hard to work on. You guys, if you've watched my videos, you see that I work on the bike using common hand tools. It is not hard. So convenience wise, it makes general maintenance very easy to do when you have the center stand, and the quick release drain plug also makes draining oil out of the bike and changing oil out of the bike a lot easier as well. The bike it's a pretty small bike, has a pretty small form factor as well. Even though you have side panniers, they don't stick out very far. The widest part of the motorcycle is actually the handlebars. So anywhere where your handlebars can actually fit through, you can fit through. So lane filtering, if you live in California, lane filtering with this bike is actually great. It's very lightweight, being only 385 pounds, I believe. I believe mine is probably a little bit heavier than that because I have all the extra stuff that I put on it over the months that I've had it. And but you know, being able to maneuver with it is very easy. It's very flickable. It handles extremely well. Convenience wise, it pretty much checks all the boxes, especially for the price point that you're able to purchase this motorcycle at. All right, so now we're going to talk about the value of this motorcycle, what you get for the amount of money that you spend. Now, in all reality, I'm kind of a little bit salty when it comes to how much money this bike is actually being sold for, because folks who live in third world countries such as Spain or the Philippines, this bike sold, especially in the Philippines, I've heard goes for around I think $1,350 US or $1,400 US. Really cheap. We're talking about cheaper than a Hawk 250. And when it comes to that price point, getting this bike, mind you, I think in those countries the bike is carbureted and not fuel injected like it is here in the States. But still, for $1,400, I mean, even with all the issues that I'm going to be talking about in a reliability section, for $1,400, man, I'm sold. You get a fully equipped adventure bike with crash guards and the luggage and all this stuff for only $1,400 potentially. Man, I'm kind of salty, because here in America we have to spend literally 3 times that price point, $4,200, and then you have on top of that all the fees and the freight and the taxes and blah 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 blah. Okay, so in reality, at least when it comes to how much I have spent on this bike, the way that it sits today, which I showed you with all the features early on this video, I spent more around now with a new top box and the little seat cover that I have, closer to $6,300, or yeah, almost $6,300 so far has been spent the way that my bike is set up right now. So that's quite a bit of money. But if you're going to buy it directly from CSC and not do anything to it, depending on where you live, out the door, you're going to be looking at somewhere in, $5,500, $5,300, somewhere around there. That's if you don't buy anything else. Like, you don't buy the extended warranty, you don't buy the tall seat, you don't buy, you know what I mean? So value wise, I just honestly have to say, when I bought mine, it was a steal at the time because I got mine for a discount, it being $3,700 instead of $4,200 because of the discounts that I got. My bike was discounted because it was a damaged model, or it had cosmetic damages, for one, and then two, I bought it during a New Year's sale, so I basically got $500 off on my bike. But still, for $5,500 out the door for this brand new motorcycle, in comparison to other brand new motorcycles, yeah, it's a deal. But again, later on we're going to be talking about the reliability section of this bike, and for some of the issues that at least for me, that I've had to deal with, I don't really think it's worth that price point. I mean, we've talked about the history of this bike, we've talked about a lot of different things, and one of the biggest things that I believed was that the bike evolved, or that it's gone through most of its issues and it didn't have those issues anymore, but that's not the case here. So value wise, it's in comparison to most other brand new bikes, yes, the price point is great, but for what it is that you get as far as the package is concerned, everything all together, it's great. But there's just certain issues that I've experienced with this bike where I wouldn't potentially have bought it all over again. But I'm a little bit optimistic about the bike's performance now versus what it was back then, but we'll go a little bit more in detail about that here in a moment. All right, here in the reliability section, I'm going to be talking about all the issues that I've had with this motorcycle up to this point, and how pretty much ties into the convenience factor as well, like how easy it has been to maintain or how difficult the bike has been to maintain. And also, well, when things start to get out of your control as far as certain things that are just outside of your skill level, for someone who is a potential new owner of this motorcycle, where do you go to? So as far as the issues that I have experienced with this bike, most of them are just the common issues that other people experience. The chain, as I spoke of earlier, it just sucks. Like, it craps out, not completely. It's not like it flies off or anything, but the majority of folks who ride the bike generally have to start adjusting the chain like crazy at around 1,500 to 2,000 miles in between there. So the chain is something that I've had issues with. The valve adjustments in itself, I think, well, I'll go a little bit detail about that in a moment. But a very big pet peeve of mine when it comes to this bike is the fasteners. My goodness, yes, this bike is very easy to work on, but geez, the fasteners that they use to put this bike together. I mean, this is truly a budget bike. Some, not all, but a good amount of the bolts and nuts that are used to put this bike together are such cheap quality that they strip extremely easily. And it's very frustrating because, you know, a job that you think is going to be very easy to perform, and especially with certain nuts and bolts that are on the bike that you're going to have to take apart very frequently, it's very important that you're actually able to take those nuts and bolts out and them not strip, right? So that's a huge pet peeve of mine, is the fasteners on this bike. There has been multiple fasteners on the bike that are either stripped or are about to strip, and I just don't want to strip them any further. And then there's other fasteners that I actually lost due to the just normal riding. Some of those fasteners were actually replaced while I was at CSC headquarters, for the purpose of which I'm going to start talking about now. Now, going back to the valve adjustments, I'm not sure what it was when it came to my particular bike. This particular issue is quite rare when it comes to the CSC community. This is not just a Chinese bike issue. This can be an issue that is with any manufacturer, quite frankly. But quality control. The engine that I had, the first engine that I had, this is why I had to do the whole braking process all over again. The first engine that I had, I believe that the first engine that I had was not casted and tempered properly, because once I actually started using the bike every single day, my valve adjustments wouldn't hold. It was almost like every single week After riding 200 miles, it wouldn't even make it the whole week through. After riding 200 miles, I would have to do another valve adjustment. The valves would just get way too tight, and I wouldn't be able to, ride and get the gas mileage and the performance and power. I'd have to do a valve adjustment again. I just kept on having to do valve adjustments, finding the valves tight, and it was just a never-ending cycle. And again, this issue, there's not a whole lot of folks who have reported about it, but there's definitely folks within the CSC motorcycle owners group, even on forums, who have had this issue before. And it's very unfortunate that this is something I had to deal with. Pretty much the solution to that issue was put a whole new head on the motorcycle. So what I had to do is I had to drive over 6 hours all the way to CSC headquarters to have them put a brand new top end in my engine. And from the evidence that we seen there, I mean, there wasn't anything conclusive unless we were to take some type of specialized tools to measure the recession of the valves, or to see the angle of the valves, or to see whether or not the gaps have been created, or how much things have changed through the temperature cycles versus a brand new head or a healthy head. Makes sense. So that was one issue, that very unfortunate issue that I had to deal with, and that to me, it's not very reassuring when it comes to potentially buying a Chinese motorcycle, and especially buying a motorcycle at this price point. But again, like I said, this is an issue that is not privy to Chinese motorcycles only. There's a lot of other manufacturers where you can just get a lemon. It's very rare, but it happens. I think the saving grace of that whole situation is that the customer service from CSC is absolutely amazing. They were more than willing to help in any way that they could. They invited me to come down to the service center. They allowed me to be in the back and record the entire thing so that anyone and everyone could be able to see exactly how it is that you tear the engine down, and to see how anyone else who may experience this issue can see how they can fix it. But I think that's also kind of like the downside when it comes to buying this bike, is that if you don't know how to do it, or if it's something that's too hard for you to do, like, man, that's a lot that you're gonna have to put on your shoulders and that you're gonna have to carry. But and then trying to find a actual mechanic that's actually gonna be willing to work on your bike, that's also a challenge as well. So reliability wise, it's just not there with this bike. I remember in my one video that I made, when it comes to the CSC, I made a video that was talking about, should you buy a CSC motorcycle in order to save money on gas. That video is an over 2 hour long video where I go in length and in depth about my reasoning of why I bought this motorcycle. But mind you, I did that video well before I had encountered all these different things I've encountered. It's almost as if throughout that video I actually gave so much praise to this motorcycle, and it's almost as if as soon as I was done with that video, literally as soon as I was done with that video, it's like the floodgates of issues started, just swung wide open. But here is some hope. The new engine that I have received I've gotten way better gas mileage than I've ever gotten before with the old engine. I've just completed my first week of commuting back and forth from work. It's been performing flawlessly. I've been getting a consistent about 57.5 up to 59 point something mpg. It just depends on my riding habits for the day. There's been certain days where I've passed up, trucks on the back road, or just drove a little bit more aggressive. But in general, I'm getting the same, decent mpg for the type of riding that I'm doing. And the valve adjustment has been holding. The idle is staying exactly where it needs to be. And so far, it's been holding up. So I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic that the bike will continue to perform. I mean, after all, it's made it through a week already. So we'll see. The ultimate endurance test is still on and going. I will continue to make videos about all the different maintenance that it is that I need to do and will do, so that way we can truly see whether or not this bike is to be taken seriously as a commuter bike. All right, so for my final thoughts here, for me, I'm not the typical rider, or not the typical CSC motorcycle owner, that is. I definitely have been riding my bike a lot more frequently and for a much different purpose than most of the owners out there. Most folks put maybe 3,000 miles on their bike. I put, in a year that is, I was planning to put over 10,000 miles on the bike in a year. So things are a bit different. Not only that, I don't ride this bike as an adventure bike. I use it as a commuter bike. So my perspective of this bike being a commuter bike, well, so far, especially with the new engine, it's doing its job. It's doing what it is that I bought it for. And as long as it continues to do what it is that I bought it for, this is an awesome bike. But, I mean, not everybody is riding the bike at 7,000 RPM, 50 to 60 miles an hour. Not everybody is going on really, really long jaunts of adventure. So, depending on your definition of adventure, or maybe even your definition of commuting, maybe you only go 15 miles. Maybe you only go maximum 50 miles an hour. Maybe you're going just inner city speed, maybe even 40 miles an hour. This bike would be great for you if that's who you are and how it is that you would use the bike. If you're somebody who, again, also your adventure is cruising 45, enjoying the scenery, again, this bike is perfect for you. When I was doing the break-in process for this motorcycle all over again in its current configuration, the way that it is, not the way that it was stock, but with lower gearing, man, I was getting almost 68 miles to the gallon, and the bike was riding around at 5,000 RPMs. I don't foresee any issues with the bike sustaining those type of speeds. Riding at those type of RPMs, it probably can do that all day, every day. And especially where this bike is most popular in third world countries, the speeds that they ride at are a lot slower anyway. For most of those different countries, a 250cc motorcycle is actually pretty big to them. They usually ride like one little 125s, 150s. They don't need to go that fast. So having a proper perspective, like a different perspective of, what you would define adventure to be, this motorcycle can definitely fit that bill if your expectations are set properly. But as far as American standards, or as far as my expectations for this bike, riding 50 to 60 miles an hour at 7,000 RPM, taking me back and forth from work, which is 60 miles a day, is this bike truly to be considered a real commuter bike? Well, we'll see. And again, I'll continue to post about how the bike continues to do, and we'll all get to see whether or not this bike is up for the challenge. And I look forward to releasing a 10,000 mile review to see how the bike is done and whether or not the bike is still going on. And hopefully I make it there. I really do like this bike. It's really awesome little package for what you get for the money. So until next time, guys, stay safe out there, and see y'all later.